Hey, welcome back, psychologists, to Social Psychology. I'm your professor, Ryan Keith, and welcome to our June 12th live stream. Let me go ahead and get the questions up in front of us. I'm excited for this live stream today. We've got kind of a big transition coming up ahead of us. We're moving from Module 2 into Module 3 of the semester. We're knocking out the second test of the semester, taking some of what you learned on that first test as far as how it works and applying it to the second one, and you're getting ready to complete your first research and analyze assignment. I've got a lot of really great questions for us today about the tests, about the research and analyze assignment, and then some other stuff too as far as like class policy goes. So I'm expecting we'll go a little bit longer than our last one, but I still think we're going to be in pretty good shape to cover some good material and keep it within a reasonable level today. You're going to want to make sure to listen all the way through this one. I'm going to try to hit a couple of announcements as we close out the Q&A today. And yeah, so before without any further ado, I think I'll go ahead and just jump into this one. The first set of questions I want to hit, I really want to be on top of some of the highest priority stuff, answering your questions about the upcoming research and analyze assignment. I got a number of questions about this one. Some of them overlap. But I'm hoping maybe I can kind of hit them as a set and make some sense out of something that can be a little bit confusing. In fact, our first question says, the instructions on the research paper are a little confusing for me. Would you mind explaining it in more detail? This assignment is confusing because of what I ask you to do and how I ask you to do it. Most of us are familiar with the kind of research paper that we've had to do in college, right? That paper that maybe you had to write in ENC 1101 or general psychology or marriage and family or anthropology, where you pretty much like you pick a topic, you do some research on it, and then you write about that topic. In this class, I want to focus a little bit more on the specific research skills because it's really easy to go looking for information, go looking for material, and come away with a conclusion that's not particularly well supported or that doesn't show that you really understand how to critically evaluate a source. The reason that this assignment can be confusing is because that's the goal, right? Not for you to just go collect information, but for you to demonstrate. And this is really the key here, is for you to demonstrate that you can think critically about your sources. So in writing this assignment and future assignments, one of the best things you can do is to start from a point of asking, what is the goal in this assignment, and making sure then that you tackle it exactly the way it should be. So overall, and we'll hit a couple of details about the assignment here, but overall in this research and analyze assignment, your goal is to do a couple of things. For one, show me that you can think critically about collecting sources and about the information contained in those sources. And then number two, you want to demonstrate that you're able to think critically about yourself, that from a social psychology perspective, you understand that self-verification theory and self-enhancement theory, like they explain how we get in the way of seeing ourselves clearly and how we often draw conclusions that are not true about ourselves, right? So in this assignment, what I want you to do is pick some quality that you generally believe to be true about yourself, whether it's that you're determined or you're good at math or that you're kind or a good friend or honest or lazy or even that you belong to a particular cultural or ethnic group. Whatever that is, pick a thing about you that you're willing to analyze and evaluate whether it's actually true. And then what you want to do is collect certain kinds of information about yourself. Now, I can't go asking you to collect information about yourself from peer-reviewed journals or from online articles. Most of us are not notable enough to have those kinds of things written about us. But what you can do is go collect information from the sources that are available to you, from your own experiences, from the people around you, as well as from what I was calling hard records. And then you want to evaluate these in much the same way that I would ask you to evaluate sources like from the internet or from a peer-reviewed journal. You want to see, like, are these any good? In the end, the goal here, and let me know if you can't hear me. I see we've got a few viewers right now. If I think my sound is good, but if it seems like the sound is not good, let me know and I'll try to fix it up. But we want to challenge this assumption that we tend to have that just because information is present, that it's reliable. We've all seen sources online that, like, maybe they agree with us, but we know we shouldn't really believe it and shore up those beliefs because the source isn't great or it's clearly a biased perspective. We want to do the same thing when researching about ourselves. So in this assignment, you want to collect from sources like your own experience, which maybe you can't trust because you know that you're biased when thinking about yourself, from the people around you, who again, you know are biased because they're the people who love and care about you, or even the records. And depending on the kind of records you collect, I've got a couple of questions about those coming up, but even those records might be biased because maybe you or the people around you elect to, thank you, Kaylee, I appreciate that, the heads up on the clear audio there, but those people may post things about you that are particularly flattering or critical. What you want to show is that you can question those things. This isn't about reporting on something, it's about showing critical thinking. So let's get a little bit more into some of the nitty gritty of this assignment. Is there a word requirement / length for the research project? Really great question. We got to get that foundational stuff down. In here, I say that I expect a 4-page or 1,000-word minimum. If you find yourself stretching to get those 4 pages or 1,000 words, when I say 4 pages, I mean double-spaced, 1-inch margins, not counting headers. You don't want to be like, my name, and then double spaced, and then the class, and then double spaced, and then the title of the paper, and then double spaced, and then the word limit, and then double spaced, and then your favorite color. And before you know it, you've got like a half a page, and check out all the progress you made. Like, we don't count that. If you find yourself struggling to hit the word limit or the length requirement, you know you're going to have a hard time, not because it's too short, but because it doesn't have all the information and analysis that we expect to see there. You can see these kinds of guidelines right there in the description for the assignment, but always take a look through that stuff. Go ahead and mine it for word and length requirements, as well as any formatting guidelines there might be. There are a couple of questions specifically about the kind of records we talk about. The next question says, what if I have difficulty finding hard records for the research paper because I do not post on social media? Really fair question. I think, as somebody myself, like, you'd be kind of hard pressed to find me on social media. I've got my presence on YouTube, of course, but I don't have a Facebook account. I have a Twitter, but I really only use it as a way to indirectly like share screenshots from my Nintendo Switch, right? Like, it's not a thing that I do. So we have to turn to other sources for hard evidence, right? The idea is, like, let's say you wanted to present some evidence in a court of law that you really are a certain kind of person. Where would you get that information apart from other people's testimonies or your own, right? Are there pictures of you? If you think you're somebody, for example, who's good at sports, are there pictures of you on a sports team? Do you have a plaque? Do you have a trophy? Is there a record of you in your school yearbook, right? Trying to think of these kinds of records that back it up, like, that's key. If you struggle to find these kinds of records, well, maybe that's a sign that we need to think critically about whether this sort of thing is true. The following question is the sort you might run into if you struggle with this. Do you need a certain amount of hard records for the research and analyze assignment? Yes. I ask you for a minimum of 2 each of personal recollections, of interviews with others, and for hard records. But again, that's a minimum, right? And then this person follows up saying, I think all my sources will have a bias towards me as well. Will that be a problem? So here's a cool thing. You don't need to eliminate those sources just because they're biased, but you do want to recognize their bias. This is the kind of skill that we want to practice, not just for class, but for like real life. Think about all the people you know who say, like, it's totally fine for schools to go back to normal because coronavirus isn't a big deal. And then they find an article somewhere like on Breitbart showing that we're all panicking too much about the coronavirus. Well, like, that evidence is there, but you also know that it's probably biased. It's okay to recognize it's there because that bias will tell you something about it and about the kind of people who are publishing it. So if you like interview your mom, or you find posts on Snapchat or on Twitter or on Instagram about you that reflect a certain quality, and you're like, but I know I can't trust this, well, that's a really cool part of this analysis, right? And so you can bring those in as long as you recognize that bias and really highlight it. That's the goal here. It's really cool. So definitely, like, embrace the bias, highlight it, show that we don't know anything about who we are. Like, that's the really fun thing about a class like this. Our next block of questions have to do with the upcoming tests. Like I told you guys, we had some big stuff coming up here. First question, what is the best way to study for the upcoming test? We've talked about this stuff a lot, and I know that at this point, coming up to the test, it's really frustrating to hear this, but the number one best thing you can do to prepare for the test is to do the work at a good pace all along in that 2 to 3 week block. If you're waiting until the end of those 2 weeks to really cram that information in your head, you're not going to be nearly as successful as if you'd been spreading it out systematically over the course of days or weeks. You just can't make up for that kind of distributive practice. You're putting a bunch of stress on your memory systems and you're trying to fit in too much all at once. If you are in a situation where you really want to optimize at this point, right? One way to think about it is like, why would you only study before the test? Why not take more time to study, right? And do it over a longer period? But if you are looking to maximize your study time now, go back and think about what it was I asked you about on the first test. We'll talk about that first test in a second. Think about what I asked and how I asked it. I asked you a lot about key terms. I asked some about important studies. But one of the big things I asked you to do was to connect those terms together. Also, keep in mind that one of the biggest chunks of that test is that essay question. And if you're not planning out your answer to the essay question already, you really need to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about that essay question in a bit as we tackle talking about that first test. And this is why I ask you guys to stick around, because if you can learn from some of the feedback I have for you on that first test, you're going to do way better on the second one. So paying attention to the kind of stuff I want you to know is key, but then also making sure you can make connections. You don't want to memorize definitions to terms, you want to really understand them. I saw a lot of people, for example, who seemed to feel like self-presentation was how we present ourselves as favorably as possible to the world around us. That's a part of the definition, and that's what comes from your textbook. But watching the videos, listening to the podcasts would help you understand that there's a richer definition there. It's everything about how we present ourselves to the world, including the things that we do accidentally, like how tall you are, what your skin tone is like, what your apparent gender or age is. These are all things that are part of your presentation. And understanding that nuanced definition of presentation would prepare you way better for that first test, right? We want to think about the same stuff when we come around to the second test and connecting ideas here. Keep in mind that the stuff we talked about for the first test is still fair game here, because those ideas about schemas and construals inform in a really big way how attributions work. So remembering that stuff is really key. We can't just purge that stuff and forget about it. I had a second question here. What's the best way to study for a test, in my opinion? Again, in my opinion, one of the best ways is to distribute that stuff, but you can always make use of some study techniques, right? Like making use of flashcards, as long as your self-quizzing is really good. You don't want to memorize definitions, but try to come up with new definitions and examples every time you do it. Writing out your own test questions, quizzing other people, trying to teach the information to somebody that you know, like a roommate or a family member, is a really fantastic way to practice. What's tough here is that none of these are particularly quick or easy, but that's the idea. The harder you work at it, the more you're telling your brain this information is important, and the better you'll remember it in the long run because it's important. The next question asks, for the upcoming exam, should we expect 2 extended response questions or just 1? You should expect only 1 essay question or short response question on the upcoming test. And I think, this first one, I had a hard time picking between 2 questions that I've written, and I wanted to give you guys a really great opportunity to show me what it is you know. But also I figured since you had a chance to write those essay answers ahead of time, I was actually helping boost the amount of time you had to answer the remaining questions, right? That if you get a huge chunk of the test out of the way ahead of time, writing the answers to the questions, then you just copy and paste those answers in and then answer the multiple choice like really nice and quick. This time around, I think you're just going to have the 1 essay, so you want to plan out that response carefully. The next question, 1 and 2 are going to be connected, and then I'll expand on them a little bit. When are we going to get the results from test 1? And then the follow-up question, are you going, after you finish grading our tests, will I be able to see answers so I can look back and see what I got wrong? You should get the results from test 1 probably today. At the latest, it'll be tomorrow morning. This first one took me a little while because I was grading 2 essays as well as throwing out questions that didn't work particularly well. And you can absolutely go back and learn from what you missed this time around. I think one of the biggest things you can learn from is from looking back at your essays. Some of the most common things I noticed on the essays. The first was that students who got higher grades, obviously, like it was really apparent who had prepared their answers ahead of time and who had not. Their answers were much longer, they were fuller, and they showed a deeper understanding of the terminology and how those terms come together. Answers that were shorter, that maybe used the terms but didn't really define them in depth or connect them together, they were still fine, but they were clearly written in the moment, and you didn't get the advantages you get that you get when you prepare well ahead of time. When thinking about this essay in particular coming up, you really want to be planning this now, because in the end, you want to demonstrate your knowledge of these terms, how they connect together. Look at the essay instructions where I say, like, use terms, define terms, connect those terms together, and write an essay. You want to address that essay prompt. You want to write it as an essay, and you want to show me how much you know. Just using a term and kind of suggesting how it works in the context of the example, that doesn't show me as much that you really know the term's definition or how well it works. And the fake it till you make it example, like really defining self-appraisal and reflected self-appraisal so that I know you know that those are different and I know you understand how they work, like that's really key. But also, and this only happened in a handful of essays, but if you show me that you understand how those 5 terms connect together to create the self-concept, this cycle where you think of yourself in a certain way and then you present yourself that way, and then ultimately people behave in a way that informs how you feel, changing your self-concept, like that shows me that you watched the video that was literally titled "Fake It Till You Make It," right? Usually there's a reason that I like record that video and then give you that essay. So that's something that you want to be thinking about. Future essays are not going to be connected to videos as explicitly as that one is, but I want it to be a really big like heads up that, hey, this is key stuff. You want to watch those videos, listen to those podcasts. And if you're skipping out on that material, if you're moving fast, if you're trying to like listen to the podcast while you're cutting your grass or watch the video while you're also doing homework on something else, you're not digesting that information and you're going to have a really hard time with essays. Another thing, I noticed that a number of people writing their essays, and this was partially my fault, in the prompt for the second essay on growth and fixed mindset, I provided like a bulleted list of questions. But remember, I still want you to craft a narrative, an essay, a story. I want you to take me from beginning to end and show me your writing skills. This is a writing class where you had writing prerequisites, and I want you to flex those writing muscles. I want you to show me like what a great thing you can write and how engaged like I can be. So even if I give you like a bulleted list to make it really clear, I'll say, hey, these are the points I really want you to address. Don't give me a bulleted list back. Write a really nice essay that I can follow from beginning to end. One thing that's great is you can use that bulleted list and answers in bullets as a great way to frame your essay if you want to start like doing an outline that way. But then make sure to take those bullets out, create some transitional sentences, and turn it into paragraphs for me. The last thing is when going back and reviewing your answers to see what it was you missed, make sure that if you missed a question, you didn't get credit for it from me throwing it out. Also, it happens a lot of times students are confused because they don't realize that they got credit for one that they missed. There are a lot of questions I throw out that I think they're going to be great questions, and then it just turns out that they aren't. So go ahead and double check, make sure that that worked out that way. And if you still don't understand why you missed a question, get in touch with me. You can text, you can call, you can send a Canvas message. Best thing to do is stop in during office hours so we can talk about it and make sure you know like why it was you missed it and what you can do to avoid missing questions like that in the future. I've got a couple broader questions about psychology coming up next. The next one says, are we all born with the same levels of overthinking, or do some hold less than others? I love this question because when we talk about overthinking, in a lot of ways, we're talking about self-monitoring, and we're talking about anxiety and self-esteem. And you guys remember the connection between things like anxiety and self-esteem and self-monitoring. My dad was somebody, you remember, who was really low on self-monitoring. So like he didn't overthink anything ever. One of my favorite examples of this is like, I'm a big time overthinker. My dad was not. My favorite like sandwich shop ever is Jimmy John's because I'm a sucker, I guess, for like a sub with mayo and meat. Like it's just like straightforward and I know what to order. I order the BLT or the Hunters Club and that's it. And I like it and I love it. My dad, on the other hand, loved Subway. He didn't care that like the bread was like a squishy yoga mat and that the veggies sometimes were like disturbingly hot. Like I'm not a huge fan of hot lettuce. But that didn't bother him. What he loved was that he had like 1,000 different ingredients. And if you're like me, you suffer from the like decision paralysis, right? And analysis paralysis, where it's like you don't know which of the different light dressings to get on there. Because he was just like, bang, bang, boom, I know what I want. I'm not thinking twice. I'm just doing it. One of the best ways to make yourself happy, you've probably learned from Barry Schwartz from last week's stuff, is to give yourself fewer options. Don't let yourself overthink it. If you haven't already, I'll go ahead and send out some resources for you guys to help you out with this. I'll make one of my biggest recommendations. I've made some recommendations in past weeks. I recommended Norse mythology before. This week, my big recommendation is going to be a website called wheeldecide.com, WHEEL, decide.com. Their motto is can't decide, we'll decide for you, right? And my wife and I, who are both big time overthinkers and suffer from decision paralysis, we love this because we'll get it down to like 2 or 3 restaurants, TV shows, movies, destinations that we want to do, but we can't decide. We just plug it into Wheel Decide. It's like a Wheel of Fortune wheel. You plug these options in, you spin the wheel, and you go with it. And doing that really helps break out of that overthinking. And in the end, will let you be happier with the choice you made because you don't have to doubt yourself and whether it's perfect or not. The next question, what are the psychological effects of sleeping for 2 to 3 shifts of 2 hours at a time for a period of 2 weeks? This question comes to us from somebody who probably suffers from what the APA defines as shift work sleep disorder. If you've ever had to work 12s or 16s or 24s, like any of these really long shifts that people do, whether it's having to work until close one night and then work opening the next day, or if you're working like in a healthcare facility where you work overnights, you know how this can wreck your sleep schedule. And one of the things that we know, even though there's still a bit of a mystery behind how and why we sleep, we know that you suffer major effects when you don't sleep well enough. In fact, skipping out on sleep to do things like have fun or go to work or to study for tests ends up doing more damage to your productivity than the good you'd get out of it. If you end up missing 4 hours of sleep to study, your grade will be worse off than if you had dedicated that time to sleep instead of studying. Um, Being sleep deprived for even a single night, much less for 2 weeks, it affects your ability to remember. It affects your ability to think critically. You're a dangerous driver. You have a hard time remembering stuff. You're more emotional and more likely to get in fights. You're more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. Your blood pressure is more likely to be high. You're more likely to snack on stuff. When you're sleep deprived, you get the munchies in the same way that you do when you're stoned. Not that you ever get stoned, because it's not legal for recreational use in the state of Florida. But if it were and you had gotten stoned, you'd know what the munchies were like, and it's the same munchies you get when you're sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation is horrible for us, and yet we exist in a culture that encourages us to skip out on our sleep on a regular basis. It's like sleep and recreation are these things we're not allowed to do because they're not productive. But in the end, and you can tell I care a lot about this stuff, in the end, if you invest time in feeling good and taking care of yourself, not only will you be happier, but you're going to be more successful and productive. I got a quick personal question, and then one last question about class business. What's my favorite type of mythology? Greek? Norse? I don't have a favorite type of mythology. I keep talking about this Norse mythology book mostly because I really liked it in particular. I like Neil Gaiman's work, generally speaking. But I think like all of us can connect this to this idea of like these pantheons of gods, especially when we're not directly connected to it. We think about our own religion and spirituality as this really holy thing, but other cultures, folk tales, and mythology pantheons are kind of like our superhero comics. So it's a lot of fun. It's cool stuff. I don't have a favorite, but it's all enjoyable. Last question about class policies. When am I going to be able to update the grade book? You should see a number of grades going in soon. Kind of at the end of each week, I go ahead and grade some of the stuff that's been turned in. And I think I've got, last week's stuff I'm wrapping up and I'll be publishing as I get that in there. As we get ready to go into the 3rd unit of the semester, it's really important to remember that success in this class is derived more than anything from the amount of time that you spend on it. If you are having a hard time with the tests, with the written assignments, with the grades that you're getting on these, what I really need you to do is reach out to me, talk to me, because what we can do together is identify places to A, get more time that you can dedicate to the class, and B, maximize that time so it's as effectively spent as possible. Because if you're not investing that time well, you're not getting the best out of it, you're not going to be happy with your grade in the long run. Even if you're somebody who's getting an A right now and you're super happy with your grade, I guarantee there's a way that you could rearrange that time more effectively so that you're working less and you're happier with the work time that you're investing. If you find yourself tired when you're studying, if you find yourself forcing yourself to like push through your study time, you know that you're overextending yourself and that time is not as effectively spent as it could be. So what we really want to do is focus on how to spend that time well so that you can work when you feel really good. You can quit working when you feel good. And then you can do something fun that you can really enjoy. Because I mean, if you're not having a good time, what's even the point here, right? And I know I come from a huge position of privilege saying that sort of stuff. But I mean, really, if you're not having a good time, like, we're doing it all wrong. It's silly of me to say that, like, you should be having fun with all this stuff, but at least a little bit, right? And if you can't find a way to have fun, get in touch with me and I will help you understand how to have fun with this. But yeah, so we want to make sure that you're spending the time you need and that that time is distributed in a way that makes this effective for you. If you haven't already, take a look at the essay for test number 2 so you can be drafting that response and get in there. And if you're not already well underway on your research and analyze assignment, you need to be getting on that. Remember, writing is a process. It's not about generating a product that you slap out and then breathe a sigh of relief and turn it on in. You're not going to be happy with that. So give yourself time to treat it like a process. Finish that writing assignment. Come back the next day and look for ways to improve it. So yeah, as always, if you have questions about the test, about the assignments, about the grade, about anything, jump into Canvas and sign up for a time to talk during my office hours, or hit me up through text, through Canvas messaging, through email, give me a phone call, or submit more questions through these Q&As. I'm feeling really good about how we're doing here, but I hope you feel as good about it as I do. So yeah, I hope you guys keep having a good time with this stuff. It's kind of a particularly wild and relevant time for social psych. Hopefully you're driving everybody around you crazy, saying that you understand how all this stuff works and you're not surprised by it, because now you are in fact a social psychologist. So yeah, get in touch with me, talk about cool social psych stuff, ask me some questions. But until then, I'm your Professor Ryan Keith, and this is Social Psychology. Bye-bye.